have a question about teacher too. I know the teacher is very important in terms of successful for this, the education. I just wondering, is private school got any kind of like industrial standards or separate industrial standard to pick the teacher than the public schools system, and it's got a higher standard? You know what I mean? Like recruit the teacher.
Yeah, it's a similar question, as you pointed out, to one that was asked earlier, and I think we talked about some of the process there. For us, I think, at least at Crescent, and I think at many schools, you can't just sort of come in and say, hey, you know what, I'm really good at this. Can I teach that with you? That's not how it's going to go. You need to have the accreditation. It doesn't have to be the Ontario teachers. We have teachers at our school that are educated outside of the province or outside of the country, but they have a teacher education. That said, and this is my 5th year at Crescent, and as I mentioned, many years in admissions. I can remember my process like it was yesterday, because it was long and it was deep, and we had a lot of conversations about different things. It doesn't take a lot of time, I don't think, to look at a teacher and say, hey, do you know physics? Because you're asking to teach physics. I think the question then becomes, as you go through the process looking for a good educator, is how do you do that? How do you make those connections? How do you allow the boys to challenge things, kids to challenge things, to grow, to be creative? And what else would you like to do with us? We have huge co-curricular programs, music or drama or outreach that was spoken about, sport. It could be anything. For a student to attend an independent school and for a teacher to educate at an independent school, if you go in with the mindset that this day will run from 8:30 until 3:30, this is probably not the right place. This happens way before 8:30. There are teachers, there are students on the properties of our schools at 7:15 engaging in robotics or sport or rehearsals or whatever it might be, getting on the bus for an outreach trip. We interact with our students, as was said, at lunch. So the question becomes, when you're meeting someone who wants to be an educator, is how do you want to do that? Not do you want to do that, because if you don't want to do that, that will be a pretty short interview. But how do you want to do that engagement moment? We stay late, we get here early, we work on the weekends. So I was chatting with some of my colleagues here. A lot of us were out this week with our students at camp. That goes till midnight. Having really good conversations, getting your head into the year. How are we going to do this? How are you going to support each other? And how are we as faculty going to support the goals that you have set for yourselves? So I think it runs far deeper than, I know my topic, I know what I want to tell you today, and I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to go home. That's really, you won't find that at our schools.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Yeah. And I think the private school, I think they're probably all got good resources, because financially, but also I think the criteria is to get the right people. The right teacher do the right job, right people do the right job.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm looking for my kids.
Right.
So resources is great. I know that, but I guess the key is we need to find the right people to do the right job.
Yeah, if you're a Jim Collins fan, get the right people on the bus, get them doing the right things. Let's all pull in the same direction, kind of thing. And that's absolutely appropriate. But you have to have a process in your school that facilitates that. You're right.
Yeah, the question is a continuation of that real-world connection in a private school versus public school. Yeah, I understand there's a lot of outreach programming and everything, but when you go real world, when you have people with all mindsets, it's easy to have a plan and all those things, but in the real world, it's totally different. So, that's one of the biggest questions I have, public school versus private school. When you go to the real world, how do you train for that one? Because when you have everybody with the same goal and character values and everything like that, it's easy to teach them and all those things. But when you go to the real world, people are different in that thing. So that can you just do outreach and teach that skills?
I'll talk a little bit about that. In terms of sort of global opportunity, I can tell you certainly that every school here today is becoming more global in terms of our programming, in terms of our access to technology, utilizing the resources that we have that may not be made available to publicly funded faculty or schools. So for us to have programs that and families that support these programs in terms of global outreach or just globalization in general. We are becoming much more global. The world's becoming smaller. It costs money in terms of education to have access to those resources, to be able to embrace those resources. In terms of preparing our kids for, we say mediocrity. We don't want to prepare our kids for mediocrity. So if the workforce or life after HSC or Crescent or St. Andrews College is mediocrity, or there is some mediocrity, great, our kids will just plow right to the top. I mean, we're training our kids to be the best that they can be. And you know, when we compare publicly funded schools or separate schools to private schools, and I talk about that peer group, it is a competitive environment. I want my child, who is gifted, exceptionally gifted, to be in a competitive environment. I want her to know what it feels like to be nipped at the toes, not to be at the top necessarily. I don't want her at the top. She needs to be in an environment with other high-achieving, goal-oriented kids. Because I know when she applies to university and wants to get into the workforce, whether it's in India, China, Kuwait, I don't care where it is, she's going to be with people who are okay with mediocrity, and others that are striving to be the best they can be. I want her to know what that feels like. And so I really believe that peer group that we're placing our kids beside, or our peer group at our schools, is probably the biggest differentiator between us and the publicly funded schools. It's not homogenous, but it's that peer group. And as our kids become older, grade 6, grade 7, grade 8, grade 9, the influence really isn't coming from us as parents. I don't believe that anyways, right? It's that peer group. So there's no problem being part of a community that embraces excellence, right? No problem whatsoever. And I think it's like cream rising to the top. When they go beyond HSC, when they go beyond Crescent, if that habit of mind is excellence and you are living it, you will rise to the top. I'm not concerned about others that are okay with mediocrity.
I think furthermore, we make sure that in our programs, many perspectives, there's a diversity of thought that's brought forward. So one of the things you seem to say was when people are thinking different ways, just because it's a community of people who believe in education doesn't mean it's a community of people who all see exactly the same thing. I'm sure you are all here because you believe in education, and I would bet that if we brought up some big topics, we would have some very differing ideas. So there is that diversity of thought, and there's a diversity of perspective. People are coming, at least in our case, people are coming from all over the GTA, different types of communities, different types of families, different experiences, different socioeconomic levels, because we do have a good financial aid program. So there is diversity within this class, even though you may not initially think so. And I think finally to add to that, you said, what happens when they get to the real world? And I think the difference is because of the experiences they've had in their primary and secondary education, they're coming out confident. I know when I left St. Clement's at the end of grade 13, which dates me a bit, there was grade 13 then, you know, I went into a whole new university program. That's what I did. And there were all sorts of different types of people there and different perspectives that I hadn't heard before. And I was able to approach those confidently because I had my background in education to say, you know what, I can engage, I can learn, I want to go forward. And that prepared me so much, where some other people felt really intimidated by the difference and by the expanse of different people there.
Yeah, I find it interesting, your question, because I'm not sure that, and this is my sense of it, if any one student were to attend a school that's not one of our schools, an independent school, I don't think that by definition they are therefore going to have what you may seek, which is that open mind, that diversity, that experience, that readiness for the real world. I don't think it exists in other places necessarily outside of our system just because they're not an independent or private school. I think a school in general needs to be purposeful in providing that educational opportunity, whatever form it takes, to understand what goes on beyond your own boundaries.